Hello and welcome to this segment on historical thinking skills, chronology, and historical causation. Our focus for today will be a two-part segment focusing on both chronology and timelines, and the second part really focusing on the historical thinking skills and implementation with a strategy on historical causation called the 6 degrees of separation. My name is Heidi Link. I am a peer coach for Forest Lake area schools and prior social studies teacher. I used to teach AP US History, and contemporary social issues, and then was prior district department chair and really involved with our curriculum department there. I'm here today to really talk to you about historical thinking skills as a whole, both because of the Common Core ELA standards that have that major focus with their craft and structure, and just the general integration and knowledge and ideas, and as a prior AP teacher because of the historical thinking skills and just the importance of really turning students into the scholars and the investigators of history. So today, as I'm talking to you, there's going to be 3 major learning objectives that we'll talk about. The first one is going to be focused on the general knowledge, and so for this first segment, talking about chronology and timelines, the difference between those two. The second of our learning objectives for today is going to be focused on the skills, and so being able to know and understand what timelines and chronology are, and being able to understand the sequencing that they go through, and so that one isolates itself a little bit more towards timelines. And then the third one is really about the implementation, and so being able to apply those patterns and really getting students to engage in the historical thinking of continuity and change over time, as well as looking at general historical causation, which I'll focus on a little bit more in depth in the second section with some instructional strategies that you could use to implement that. So with the first segment today focusing on chronology and timeline, one of the reasons that I think it's important for us to discuss this here today is that in today's modern age and in schools, there's a lot of discussion on the accuracy of language. And quite often in schools, these two terms will be used interchangeably for chronology and timeline. But if I were to actually ask you the question, what is the difference between chronology and timeline? Quite often, you would have something to say. Now, when I think about this, the first thing that comes to mind is chronology is a list, and a timeline is a graphic or an icon of some sort. And there are a lot of historians that are kind of discussing and debating this today, and so we're going to take just a little bit deeper look at these two areas. So for the first one of chronology, chronology, when we look at it, is really the foundational concept, or really, when we look at it, the foundation of history and historical thinking skills. And so when we start talking about wanting to have our students analyze history and decode history and talk about continuity and change over time and periodization, we really, really have to make sure that they understand the sequencing for which events unfolded. And so that's looking at our chronology. And so being able to understand the choices that people make, the impact that they have when you're talking younger or lower levels for elementary, and then of course for periodization, talking about the groupings and organization there too. So when we look at the definition of chronology, chronology is the arrangement of events in the dates or the order in which they occurred. And when we really think the general idea of that, typically chronology is going to be structured more vertically than horizontally. Scaling is not a requirement that's often given when we're talking chronology. And so chronology can come in a million different forms. It can be a general list. It could actually, you can find chronology in any story that you read, be it a children's story to, a chapter novel or a historical narrative. But in the end, chronology is absolutely essential for understanding and decoding history. So looking deeper at chronology, now that we understand the basic definition, here's a quote from UCLA that I thought really encompassed the importance of chronology and chronological thinking. So chronological thinking is at the heart of historical reasoning. without a strong sense of chronology, of when events occurred and in what temporal order, it is impossible for students to examine relationships among those events or to explain historical causality. Chronology provides us with the mental scaffolding for organizing our historical thoughts. And so when we're really trying to push our students to understand the sequencing of historical events, it's important for us to recognize that this can take place at any educational level, K through 12. So at the elementary level, really focusing on those historical narratives, right? And the importance of picking a strong story or historical narrative for your students, because narratives have the ability to capture our attention. And so when you draw the students into the story, then you'll be able to have them really remember and carry with them the sequencing or the order that the events took place in. And so with that, then being able to ask them what happened at the beginning and the middle and the end, and what caused each of those events to happen. What were the decisions that were made and the impacts that happened from those decisions. And once the kids have the basic understanding then of cause and effect, they can look into the true chronology going from the top to the bottom of that list. Then in the middle and high school years, building on that chronological reasoning a little bit more, and really being able to push the students in the middle school levels by adding in, of course, the mathematical thinking, and being able to add in, you know, when those events took place, how long did those events take place for, you know, really what was the root cause that occurred all of the, or impacted all of those other pieces. And in the end, really asking the students about causation and how causation then connects to that chronology, and having that full-fledged analysis of the patterns of historical duration as they unfold. And so looking at an example of chronology, what I have is one of the Constitution. And so when we look at a chronology, you'll notice that this one is laid out very much like a timeline. It's horizontal, it's not vertical, but one of the things that is representative of the chronology is, of course, that you do not have to have the spacing incremental, right? And so when we look at that scaling and the absence of this scaling, that gives us our hint that it's the chronology. Now for implementation in our practice, when we're talking chronology, for this one here, try and think of what are some questions that you could pose to students and some patterns that they could find, and connecting to that continuity and change over time. So specifically on this timeline, the events that stand out to me are the creation of the Bill of Rights, the transference of power, the peaceful transference of power from one political party to the next. And then, of course, when we begin to look at the 15th Amendment and understanding civil rights and citizenship in our country. And so if you posed the question to students, you know, what is the long-lasting impact of these events, and is there continuity or change over time with each of these, it would give a powerful question for inquiry and further research from the students. So really making sure that we don't stop with the basics of chronology or timelines with either one that we look at.